Well, the San Francisco 49ers, they nowadays are never quiet at the trade deadline. It seemed like they were in a lot of conversations. Ultimately, they make one move, a trade for Washington Commanders defensive end Chase Young. Me and Vish, we're going to be breaking down that move, what it means for the 49ers, and how they rebound in the second half, all after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the program. We're going a little later than expected, but still, it's going to be a fun show. I've got my guy, Vish, here with me. And the 49ers, they've got some trade deadline news, as always. So we're here to break it down. But first, Vish, how you doing, my man?
I'm good, Rohan. How are you? 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, hey, this is the first time in a while where we've done 2 weeks in a row. And, we've got a fun one again today. Probably a little bit of a shorter show, but still, nonetheless, an important one because, like I said, the 49ers have traded for Chase Young, sending a 2024 third-round compensatory pick. This is the pick that they get for losing Ran Carthon and D'Amico Ryans. It's one of 3 third-round compensatory picks that they will get in consecutive years. So they lose one of their third-round compensatory picks, but there's a lot about this move that both excites and also has you thinking about the future for the 49ers. Vish, though, first of all, what did you think about the move for Chase Young?
Yeah, I honestly thought it was an awesome move. I don't really see the downside to the move. Now, Chase Young seems to be healthy, right? The same knee that he tore the patella and tore the ACL on, the one that essentially had him out for 2 years, has basically fully recovered according to how he looks on the field and according to the number of snaps he's playing this year. So, given that, we're talking about a 24-year-old pass rusher with elite talent. I mean, when he was coming out of college, he was considered to be a better prospect by some than Nick Bosa, who was considered to be a very, very good defensive line prospect. And he came the next year from the same school. So we're talking about a highly gifted player who's 24 years old. I understand that there's a financial situation, but it doesn't really matter for the 49ers because either they recoup the compensation and they have flexibility with what they can do in the case that they would like to keep Chase Young based on what happens this year. Thought it was an awesome move. And then when you look at the 49ers defensive line, the last few games, they have not gotten a lot of production from Javon Hargrave, and Drake Jackson has pretty much been a no-show on the other side of Nick Bosa for the majority of this year. Randy Gregory was starting to pop. I thought if he got more snaps, maybe he would be able to solidify that problem. But now they went and got one of the better players at that position to solidify that problem. Chase Young is an elite pass rusher. He has elite pass rush moves. And he has elite athleticism. He's good enough to bend the edge with speed, but he's also strong enough to get into tackles' bodies and push them back with his power. Early in his career, when he came out of Ohio State, he was touted to be an excellent run defender. Now, I haven't fully spent time watching how he's done against the run this year. I know that he was excellent as a rookie because I watched that. But I also know the metrics for him as a run defender has not been very good this year. I wonder why that is, but I do think that a change of scenery and a little bit more discipline and coaching and a system with Chris Kaserik will do Chase Young wonders. I think this is a home run move for the 49ers. We're talking about a very, very special talent, and I think he should solidify their defense. This is one part of the issue that's being solved. The second part of the issue is getting the scheme, getting the defensive line, the secondary, everybody on the same page, everybody executing. Now, we can blame that on Wilkes. We can blame that on the players. I don't necessarily know who's at fault. All I know is that there's not being a good execution of the scheme that's being called. Perhaps the scheme is not the one that the players are comfortable with, and they need to sort that out over the bye week. So Chase Young doesn't solve all of their issues. That issue still needs to be sorted, but Chase Young does solve a need for the 49ers. He does put them over the top. He makes them a better football team. And ultimately, I think it's a home run move for them.
I think you break it down well. I mean, personally, I think this is a great move for the 49ers, especially when you consider the compensation they give up. The 49ers, they were, they were in talks with a lot of different players. Montez Sweat was one of them as well. And you know how Montez Sweat, they got outbid for Montez Sweat, end up giving up they Montez Sweat goes for a second-round pick, a pretty high second-round pick from the Chicago Bears. You also talk about guys like Rasul Douglas, who the 49ers ran on. They end up getting outbid, but they make one splash move, and it's important because they go for Chase Young and they trade only a third-round compensatory pick for this move for Chase Young. Now, on the field, Chase Young provides you a good amount of things. You point out the run defense. I think that there's a tale of two stories. I mean, he was good prior to his injuries in the run game. We'll see if he can get back to the field, but I'm confident that, the way that Chris Kosera is going to use him, it's going to, create some opportunities for the 49ers in the run game. And I think that he can be a 3-down player and he can help you as a base down guy. Because right now, the 49ers, I mean, they operate with their rotation, but Drake Jackson isn't producing as much as you want. This move is an indictment on him, as the 49ers probably don't feel as comfortable with him right now to roll with him in their rotation, instead going forward with guys like Chase Young and Randy Gregory. But also, I think Chase Young will provide you some inside-outside flexibility. The 49ers had these packages where they could really put their best pass rushers on the field before. You're still trying to get back into that mold. You had guys like Omenahue before. And I think now you can have packages where you might have Chase Young, Randy Gregory, and Nick Bosa on the field in pass rushing situations. Combine those guys with the interior guys, you've got some good players. The point, though, is you now got to mesh it with the scheme. And I think that's why that was one of the bigger questions going into the deadline. For me, my take was, I think adding talent is obviously a benefit anytime you add talent. Regardless of the compensation, it's adding talent. However, I thought the 49ers' biggest problem wasn't with their talent. It was with the scheme. And I think that problem still exists, regardless of whether what you like about the Chase Young trade and things like that. So I think that that's a different question. But on the move itself, it's a good move.
Can we touch on that though? Scheme,
let's go for it.
Though,
yeah.
Because there's two things in what you said that I want to address. And I think the first one, that's a really good point, and maybe we can save it because I think it leads into another topic on what you said. And then the second point on the scheme. Look, we can blame the scheme in a lot of ways. And I understand this is not the scheme the 49ers are comfortable running. They play a lot more man coverage on first and second down. I think that has to play into the lack of sync in terms of how they're fitting the run. We're talking about historically the Niners on first and second down played quarters coverage or cover 3. That's what they did, and they were very good at fitting the run from those two coverages. Both of those coverages are good against the run. They are sound in terms of the run fits. Now they're playing a lot of man coverage, and it's causing mistakes. But the players also got to execute. And this is where I feel like
100%.
Steve Wilks is getting all the blame and all these 49ers players are skating by. Javon Hargrave, we're talking about a super highly paid player, a free agent acquisition for the 49ers. He's been ghost town last 2 games. He didn't record a stat in the last game. He's not been very good. Fred Warner, he's supposed to be the best linebacker in the NFL. He's not been as good as he was in the first 5-6 games the last couple games. We're talking about, Dre Greenlaw. Dre Greenlaw looks beaten to all kinds of hell. He looks banged up, and he's been missing tackles and everything. Then in terms of, when we're looking at the 49ers defense, like the last touchdown that Joe Mixon scored, the running duo, standard run play, Mixon kicks it outside. You get the force player. We have to have a crack and replace with Diamador Lenore. He misses it. And again, we can blame Wilks for calling man coverage, but if Diamador Lenore is running inside when his responsibility is to now become the force player on the run fit, things are issues for the 49ers defense. We lost Rohan here, I guess. I think he'll be here shortly. But either way, my bottom line is, without Rohan here to respond to me, is we can blame Wilks all we want, and I agree that the scheme hasn't been the best, and I think there's an abundance of blame he deserves, and a lot of it stems from that individual call against Minnesota, which was just, frankly, one of the worst calls I've ever seen by a 49ers defensive coordinator, and I lived through the entire Jim O'Neill experience, okay? But as did most of you, by the way. We're all pretty old. If I'm old, then you guys are all. I'm just saying, not to throw shade at anybody. But I ultimately think that the defense also needs to play better. The star players, these guys that make a lot of money, these guys that are excellent football players in our mind, also need to play up to that billing. I think they all looked a little bit exhausted too. We completely lost Rohan, so I'm gonna have to go with the single screen here like this because Rohan is the one in charge of hosting our show today. So there's nothing I can do about fixing the overlay until he returns here. But yeah, ultimately, There we go. Steve Wilks isn't all to blame. The other point that Rohan made that I wanted to address, and maybe we can see it as he keeps coming back into the show, is there's Rohan. There we
I
go.
don't know what happened, but we are back. I
All
apologize.
right, there we
Let's
go.
go
He's
forward, though.
back. He's back. Okay. So all I was saying, and I said it in quite a long-winded way as I tend to. I just was saying that Steve Wilks deserves blame. He deserves culpability. But the 49ers star players need to play better regardless of what the calls are. They're not playing as well as they have been. They're not playing as well as they need to. I do think that they looked a little bit exhausted. And so the bye week came at a very, very fortunate time for them. But I don't think this is all. Let's just put it on Steve Wilks. He needs to call the game better. He certainly does. I'm not saying he's not. He's doing a great job. But the Niners players also can't just put all the blame there. They need to play a little bit better. And then the one thing I wanted to address the point you made is I love the idea of Gregory, Bosa, and Chase Young all on the field together as pass rushers, right? We saw Menahue kick inside in years past. We saw Arden Key kick inside in years past. Of those three, I think this is a fabulous opportunity to kick Bosa inside at times. We've seen Myles Garrett. We've seen Micah Parsons. The new thing is stick your uber superstar freak edge rusher in front of the center and slide protection away from him or slide protection to him and make the center have to deal with him right after snapping the ball one-on-one, right? Why can't the 49ers do something like that with Nick Bosa? Maybe that's something that they don't look to do. I don't know, but there's a suggestion. And then the other thing is Nick Bosa would be a lethal rusher inside. He's too fast for guards and he's strong enough to push them inside. I don't know that he needs to rush inside on every down, but him or even Randy Gregory or even Chase Young, one of them kicking inside would be a nice twist, and it would be an expansion on the NASCAR package that D'Amico Ryans really coveted last year. So I love that idea, and I do think that it adds to the possibility of how this D-line can dominate. But the first things foremost, before we talk about them rushing the passer, we have to address the fact that they have not stopped the run well, and they're going to have to do that to earn the opportunity to do all of these cool things with these special defensive linemen rushing the passer. And that's the first thing they're going to have to fix whenever they meet and go into the drawing board and recoup after the bye.
And I think you bring up a lot of good stuff right there. I mean, the number one thing that you bring up is the execution portion. And I wrote this in an article this week. Steve Wilks is the scapegoat. He's getting a lot of the blame. And I think some of it is definitely deserved. I think there are improvements, and he understands that himself. But not only is, you talk about the defense, and you pointed out a lot of things execution-wise defensively. You can also point out the offense. I mean, the offense hasn't been anything that special the last 3 weeks. You score 17 points in 3 straight weeks. You're not supposed to score 17 points, with the talent the 49ers have offensively, as well as the run game. I mean, you talk about the run fits that the 49ers have had defensively. It hasn't been that good over the past few weeks, and this is an area where they've usually been stout, and this is an area where you can point more so to execution. You got to put your players in better positions to win. Steve Wilks knows that, and that's more so in a pass rushing standpoint. But I do think the 49ers need to fix several things, and part of that goes on the execution as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I 100% agree on all accounts there.
Now,
and by the way, I do think the last couple weeks, that's where I do feel bad for Steve Wilks. It's not that if we were cutting a blame pie, I wouldn't assign him the biggest piece of it. I certainly would. It's that I feel like for all of the issues that are plaguing this football team, and there's a lot of them, they stuck him out in front of Minnesota where we were talking about that one call, which was, I said it, right? One of the worst calls I've ever seen. And we all lived through Jim O'Neill, and I'm telling you, it's one of the worst calls I've seen from a 49ers defensive coordinator, right? We addressed it. But we addressed it for 4 days after that football game. And there were a lot of other things in that football game that were wrong other than that call. But the only thing we talked about was that for 4 days, right? We didn't do that with Christian McCaffrey's red zone fumble, but we did that to Steve Wilks, and he had to do a public apology, like addressing it as if, like, he committed a crime. He made us some sort of mistake. That's what he needed to do in his press conference. I do think that a lot less was on him this week, but the theme carried on because we talked about that so much last week. And again, I would assign him the biggest piece of the blame pie, But I think by assigning him that piece, we've gotten to a point where we're just blaming Steve Wilkes for all the issues wrong with the 49ers. And there's
Right.
issues that start with one, their star players are not playing as well as they need to be, as well as they're capable of, as well as they usually do. And then the other thing is, and this is the 49ers offense, you brought up those execution issues. Let's go right there. Their biggest issue to me right now, Rohan, is that they don't run the football well. And that is a problem. I think it first starts with the fact that their offensive line without Trent Williams is just not good. They have an average offensive lineman, in my opinion, in Aaron Banks, a not very good one in Jake Brendel, a not so great one in Spencer Burford, and a not so great one in Colton McKivitz. It's not a great offensive line. Scheme can only help them and protect them so much. They've gotten out of game situations because the defense has been on the field for so long. But to me, the fact that they're unable to run the football, that starts, and a lot of their issues on offense all come from there. And it starts from the fact that, hey, everything falls from the fact that this team identifies itself as a running football team. That's how they want to base their identity on. That's who they want to be. That's who they claim to be. And we're talking about a team in back-to-back weeks in crucial moments in the game. The first, maybe not crucial, because I guess the first drive against Cincinnati, there was a lot of game left. But in two separate moments on two individual drives, they've had 2nd and 1, 3rd and 1, and they've been unable to convert 2nd and 1, 3rd and 1 on runs. That's problematic, especially when we're talking about, hey, a defense that isn't so fantastic in Minnesota and Cincinnati, who had some issues against the run, though I thought they were much improved against Seattle and much improved against the 49ers.
You talk about the run game. I mean, I pointed it out. It seems like Kyle Shanahan had acknowledged after the last game that it felt like he went away from the run a little too much in that game. But it also seems like a reason he's going away from the run is because he just doesn't have enough confidence in that offensive line. Without Trent Williams, this offensive line is not as good. Now, people looked at last year's offensive line, and a lot of people had questions going into last year about that offensive line. I thought going, in the offseason, last offseason, that this offensive line wasn't going to be that bad. I honestly thought they were going to be a top 10 team at the beginning of the season. They end up being around that top 10 range. This year, though, I had a lot more reservations. I thought this unit was not going to be that top 10 unit from last year because you always have to account for the 2 to 3 games that Trent Williams will miss. You don't have tackle depth. That was my biggest issue with this team this year. It wasn't the starting position at right tackle. It wasn't the nickel corner. It was the tackle depth because those 2 to 3 games that Trent Williams misses, you don't have a competent replacement at the moment. You lost that guy. Well, that guy's your starter now. You don't have a replacement at the moment where you can truly trust them to hold it down for 2 to 3 games. Mark that with, we've seen a little bit of regression. Well, not regression necessarily, but not the necessary improvements from Spencer Burford, which may play with him, which may be a reason of he's playing next to Colton McKivitz, who also hasn't been that good. Jake Brendel has seen some regression, and overall, this unit, when you put it together, has not been that strong in 2023. It's been really, if we're being honest, it's been a lot of chunk plays for the 49ers that have gotten them to be, to kind of get away from some of the little things because they've had issues with some of the little things overall, and that's kind of been overshadowed the first few weeks because they're making a number of major plays. But in the games where they're not able to make major plays and you kind of need to win with the little things, that hasn't happened to a big degree, and they've ended up faltering.
I agree. I agree 100%. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. And I think these are some of the little things that they need to fix when they come back from the bye. And so, yes, I think we both agree to just kind of put a bow on this conversation. We both agree, hey, the Chase Young move was 100% a home run. It makes the 49ers certainly better. But let's not pretend like it's a deodorant that's going to cover every one of the flaws that they've shown as they've gone on this 3-game skid. There's a few other things internally that they need to fix. And as long as they fix those, which they're very fixable, and we've seen them fix it in the past, the addition of Chase Young should allow them to be much better football team and increase their opportunity. By the way, when we get into the playoffs, you can never have too many good edge players. The best example of this is the 2007 Giants and what they did to arguably the greatest football team of all time with Justin Tuck, Osi Menura, Matthias Kiwanuka, Michael Strahan, all of those guys. They had so many defensive linemen, so many edge players. Philly has had similar depth the time they won the Super Bowl, the time they got to the Super Bowl last year, and then this year when they're the last, or they have the best record. in the sport. I was about to say they were undefeated, but I forgot what Zach Wilson did to them. And then so when we're looking at that, ultimately for the 49ers, having Chase Young is not only going to help in the interim and help them be a better team now, when we're talking about the playoffs, when having these special defensive linemen make such an impact in these colder weather, slower, kind of grinded out, grimier football games, where putting pressure on the quarterback, given the pressure of the situation, adds that much more of an effect on his play. I think it's massive.
Yeah, and I do agree. Let's start with that point. We talked about, Chase Young, the value internally that he brings to the 49ers. But what do you think this 49ers defense will now have with Chase Young in the fold? We talked about the issues. Let's go to the positive side. What do you think the 49ers defense can now do with Chase Young?
Yeah, they have one. They have a completely viable edge on the other side of Nick Bosa. Not just a speed guy. He's a speed guy, but he can win every type of way. He's a very complete pass rusher. He's got a complete set of moves. I've heard people say his motor isn't the best. Even in the comments, I saw somebody said, "Hey, his motor isn't the best." I don't necessarily remember that being an issue. Again, I'm not up to date on my Chase Young watching. I only have really watched Chase Young his rookie year, but we're when I saw him his rookie year at least, and now we're talking about 2 years before this, and it's not necessarily fair for me to use that as my basis. But unfortunately, that's what I have to go off of. In his rookie year, I did see a player that had a big motor. Now, Washington has had a lot of issues plaguing their football team that go beyond Chase Young. Chase Young has obviously evidently had issues with his health. We're also talking about a player who Washington essentially gave up on after drafting second overall, right? They didn't take his fifth-year option. And by trading him for a compensatory pick, they basically told you they had no interest in signing Chase Young to a long-term deal. And so we are talking about a player who had money on the line, and I wonder if that would have affected how he was going to play, because obviously more sacks equals more money. So perhaps he was saving his best rushes for just the pass rush opportunities, which weren't a dime and a dozen, by the way, because Washington was trailing in a majority of the football games Chase Young played in. So I think there's a lot of factors that go into why these questions exist about Chase Young. I do think coming to an organization that has a sense of purpose, that has a culture that is going to integrate him into a role and to fit a role for a greater purpose is all going to change his mindset. I do think from exactly what I remember when he was coming out of college and who he seemed to be his rookie year when he was winning Defensive Player of the Year, I do think he's capable of reverting to that. And I think that also includes him being a menacing run defender, which I do think the 49ers need. I don't think their edges or their other edge away from Nick Bosa, though Cleveland Ferrell has been okay, specifically Drake Jackson. I don't think he's been particularly strong in the run game at all this year. And so I think Chase Young should be a double whammy support in both of those areas. Again, this is all under the guise and under the assumption that his knees aren't like eternally messed up because of the patella and ACL back to back. Because again, there's a part of me that's always wondering if his knee is a lot worse than anybody is letting on, just because, hey, we're talking about a 24-year-old pass rusher, Rohan, that was traded for essentially a compensatory pick. 24-year-old pass rusher that when he was coming out of the draft, people were comparing him to like Myles Garrett and some of the great prospects to ever come out. And
hell, they were comparing him to Nick Bosa.
Right. And he's getting traded for a compensatory pick. That makes me think that there's something we don't know. Like, I know the Niners are a super smart organization, but there's no way other teams can be that stupid where they don't see the value of a 24-year-old edge rusher with this talent. So I do think that under the assumption that everything's okay with his knees, we're talking about a massive impact. I do think, one, because of his pass rushing skill set, but then two, when you integrate him into the culture, what it can do with his ability to play the run when he's bought in and he's interested, given how talented he is. I think in both ways he's going to enhance the defense.
I think so too. And I mean, I'm intrigued to see what he does in the run game, because if you can have Chase Young involved in the run game, that allows you to have some 3-down linemen, because you don't have to rely on Cleveland Ferrell as much, a guy who's been your base downs guy pretty much, and it allows for you to do a couple of different things defensively, because that your pass rush sets and your base down sets can be very similar, allowing you to disguise a couple of different looks. And so I'm intrigued to see what Chase Young can do in this team. I'm intrigued to see if his motor if that's an issue, increases with this team with Chris Kosera coaching him and things like that. But I'm also intrigued to see, you're talking about that speed to power combination. Definitely want to see that with Nick Bosa. It seems like ever since D Ford's injury, we've been we've tried to find that for Nick Bosa, and we just haven't found the perfect package. You talk about Drake Jackson, you talk about the different guys. And I mean, it's not like we haven't had good pass rushers. Charles Omenihu was a good pass rusher. Arden Key was a good pass rusher, but they were good pass rushers in different ways. Even Randy Gregory is a pass rusher, a good pass rusher, but in a different way with his length. And so you now have that speed guy on the other side, but you said it, Chase Young wins in multiple ways. And so I think it's cool to see you have Chase Young in this fold, but like I said at the beginning, I want that NASCAR package or an iteration of it to be implemented. I want the pass rushers on the field. If you trust them enough to be good run defenders, Armstead's a solid run defender. Bosa's a solid run defender. Young can be a solid run defender. Gregory, while he might not be there to the other level, I mean, it's good to have him in the fold as a pass rusher. If you can have 4 good pass rushers or even 5 good pass rushers in those 5 defensive linemen combinations, if you could have that many good pass rushers on the field at the same time, I think it just adds value to the 49ers and maybe makes things easier for Steve Wilks, where he might be overthinking things with the defensive line, trying to utilize them in different ways to get to the quarterback. Just let them rush 4, allow them to fill their lanes and, utilize their arsenal and moves in order to get to the quarterback.
Right. I 100% agree. I 100% agree. I think we're talking about from an edge rush duo standpoint. You said Nick Bosa's never had the other guy. Yeah, Nick Bosa has never had a guy where we say in tandem with Nick Bosa, they might be the best edge duo in the sport. Not since when him and D Ford were basically playing for like the first 6 games of his rookie year when he was on a bum ankle and D Ford was actually healthy. Pretty much the only portion of his Niners career he was healthy.
Yeah, and I mean, exactly. Like you said, he was not healthy for that long. And so now you hope that that's not the case with Chase Young. Let's talk about something the 49ers did not do at the deadline, which is trade for a cornerback. Talk was there that they were involved with certain players. Rasul Douglas was one of them. Ended up not going for a cornerback. What do you think about that move?
I do think that they needed one. It was their biggest need. We've talked about it actually together. The fact that we felt like there were 2 corners they could rely upon throughout this year, and I do think the play from Lenore and Ward has been a little up and down at times. Partially, I think this is where the Steve Wilks plays into it. Maybe they're not put in positions that they were put in previous years, and they're just not as comfortable doing that. Though with the amount of press man that they're playing, Mooney Ward, that was his game in Kansas City. So I don't know that that's exactly an excuse for him, but we've seen his confidence sometimes go a little bit up and down. The cool thing about him is even when it goes down for a corner, he's always able to build it back up. So I fully expect him to bounce back after a somewhat rough couple of weeks. But I definitely think they wanted to acquire a corner. I think a corner was a need. The problem is one corner is a premium position because we're talking about a small suspect of guys that actually have the athleticism to play the position. And typically, right, we're talking about the prime age of basically from when they come into the NFL to when they're 26, 27. That's basically their athletic prime where they can run well enough to play the position. I mean, how many great 30-year-old corners do you know? Very rare, right? Very rare that we see a corner like Richard Sherman play well in his early 30s or a Revis play well in his early 30s. It doesn't really happen. And so given that, there's always a premium placed on them in terms of draft capital, right? They're drafted high in the draft. There's a premium placed on them. It's a premium position. And so because of that, I do think when you looked at the corner market, the Niners had to kind of thread this perfect needle when they spend midseason where they couldn't spend a premium pick because there's some offensive and defensive line additions that they need to eventually make in the draft with younger and cheaper players that they can't use their high spent assets on anymore, which means that they had to thread this needle with the middle round pick. And I don't know that there was a value for a corner that could come in and make an immediate impact for the 49ers and was going to be worth the middle round pick. There was a point this season when I suggested the name Jalen Johnson, but this was like this was week 2 when I suggested Jalen Johnson. Jalen Johnson completely outplayed that price that I was suggesting. I was suggesting a Chase Young move with Jalen Johnson where you trade the compensatory third for him and then he walks and gets a third. he was going to go for a first round pick or a second round pick had he got moved this trade deadline, likely a first for the 49ers, because I don't know that the Bears would be too enthused by a pick in the 60s. And so therefore, at least that's what we expect for the 49ers. And so therefore, as much as I think they needed a corner, as much as I think they needed a secondary player, I don't know that there was necessarily a move that made sense. I don't know that there was another team ready to tango or give up the player that was right for them. So they went and got the next best thing to help their secondary, which is a pass rusher.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right in that it's tough to trade for a corner, and corner prices were high. I mean, the 49ers were up there for Rasul Douglas. I did not
Right.
expect him to go for a
Rasul
third and a
Douglas for
fifth
a
round
third
pick.
is nuts, especially
Yeah,
with
for a
this
third
contract.
round pick. Yeah, that was pretty high. That was pretty high. I
Yeah.
mean, you talk about other players. Jalen Johnson for the 49ers would have costed them their first round pick. Ryan Poles
Agreed.
said they were not going to be inclined to trade him, unless it was going to be for a 1 or 2, speculating early 2s for teams that had those picks. So it was going to be tough. It was going to be tough, and you're not going to want to trade your 1 this year. You don't. You need a tackle. You need other positions in the draft. Hell, a cornerback in the first round is going to be more valuable than Jalen Johnson at
Right.
$17 million a year,
Right.
given this specific team. And
Right.
so I think that, you can understand why they didn't trade for a corner. I do think that they could have used one for sure. I think, like, when I made the comment about them scheme being the bigger issue than talent, that doesn't mean talent wasn't the issue as well in certain positions. And I think corner was one of them. You could have used a guy like Rasul Douglas who has solid press coverage skills to potentially implement more press man, or
Plays
implement
nickel.
the amount of press man exactly that you're using now. And so I'm curious how the 49ers try and adjust, because unfortunately Isaiah Oliver has not been good in coverage. That's just how it's been. He's been put in tough situations. There have been tough one-on-ones. But unfortunately, that's what you're going to expect now with Isaiah Oliver, because what are teams going to try and do? They're going to try and isolate their top receivers in the slot to utilize them in that way.
Right.
And we saw, Jamar Chase being used in the slot on his touchdown. Tyler Boyd was using the slot, obviously, on the touchdown that he got over Isaiah Oliver. There are certain ways that teams will try and use
he's getting
their
beat
guys.
vertically, right? Which
Yeah,
is the bigger issue.
that's the
Because when
issue.
you're talking about corners getting beat deep, if they're able to beat deep, you can beat them anywhere and anywhere else, because they're always scared of you running by them on every play. And Isaiah Oliver is getting run by quite often. And then I do think, to his credit, because I've been an Isaiah Oliver doubter, he's had a couple of good games this year. I thought specifically the Minnesota game, when the defense played poorly, he played pretty well. He's improved in his tackling. Early in the season, preseason, he was not doing well as a tackler either. He's improved there. He definitely closes in and thumps a little bit. I just think it's an unfortunate situation where he was kind of a coveted free agent for them, I guess. They gave him guaranteed money, and he has just not worked out into the capacity that they would have liked. And I think you nailed it on the head when you're talking about Rasul Douglas, because I do think that you would have to trade a third-round pick for him and incur kind of a weird contract in his case. But you brought it up, right? He's kind of what they imagined Isaiah Oliver to be as a
Right.
nickel. So, yeah.
I mean, the one guy that I'm thinking right now, a guy who was also a Steve Wilkes guy who hasn't really been talked about, Darrell Luter is a guy who I think that might be the underlying guy who potentially could come in. And I don't know if he plays really because he's a rookie, but Darrell Luter's the press man guy who I'm personally thinking, if anybody was going to break out into that group and potentially earn playing time, it would be him on the outside and moving Lenore to the inside.
I don't want to be a hater. I have not watched Darrell Luter at all, so I will preface by saying that I don't want to be a hater, but I also want to be a little bit realistic, because I've heard this take from many people who talk about the 49ers, and I understand why you're saying it, but here's my thing. How many fifth round corners do you know that missed the entirety of preseason, missed the
Right.
entirety of the offseason, come in midseason and make a real impact? First of all, how many fifth round corners do you know that make an impact as a rookie? Let alone how many fifth round corners do you know that are starting in the NFL, given the physical requirement to play in the NFL? Let alone how many fifth round corners that get injured, basically don't play the entirety of the offseason, spend some time on, the injured. He was on PUP, and then come back mid-season, and all of a sudden they're contributors to a defense that's vying to win the Super Bowl. Come on, let's be a little realistic, Rohan.
I know. The reason that I bring his name up is because, frankly, I don't think the 49ers have the solution on their roster. And so the way that I see it, I honestly did
But
not expect
you
him to
like
get
Luter more than Womack?
size. I think his size probably makes him a better fit for what the 49ers want to do. And again, this is going off two players where we really don't have much game tape on. And so you're going
Mhm.
off measurables, you're going off what you saw from them pre-draft and things like that. And so that's the reason why I think I'd prefer him in Wilkes's personal scheme if you're running the amount of press man that you are, because I think Womack will get beaten off the in the nick, or not in the nickel, on the outside with his respective size. So that's where I look at it. But I don't see too many options that the 49ers have in their current room that they think can make an impact. I mean, it's clear that they don't trust Ambry Thomas in that role because he hasn't been seen in weeks when Isaiah Oliver's kind of in place on the in the nickel
Right.
role.
Well, they tried that already, right? We talked
Yeah,
about that one too. We've talked
yeah.
enough this year. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that one didn't work out as well. I mean, I think that there are a couple of things that the 49ers kind of have to do defensively. I wonder if they try and experiment at the cornerback position, but you are right in that, it's midseason. He is a rookie. That's the one guy though, I think out of anybody could potentially make an impact in this group if there's anybody on that team.
All right, I'll go with Womack. I like Womack. I think Womack has a press
You were a
profile,
Womack guy
even
in
though
the
he's a little
preseason, I remember
smaller.
when you
Yeah,
said
because he's got those
you
longer arms, so that makes him have a bigger frame. The other thing I like about Womack is that he can run, and he's feisty. But for whatever reason, the Niners brass has not been the biggest Sam Womack fan, right? They started off
right.
as a big fan of Sam Womack, and then they benched him kind of out of nowhere. After that Week 1 monsoon game, he was the one starter that got benched after that game, and because of Diamador Lenore outplayed him in practice, and then he basically didn't see the field for the rest of that football season, basically. And then this
Yeah.
year, for whatever reason, he didn't play nickel really at all. It was Diamador Lenore going to play nickel, but unfortunately, Ambry Thomas couldn't cut it on the outside. So then they put um Oliver
Oliver
on
in the
the
nickel,
inside
yeah.
and then kicked Diamador Lenore back outside. Womack was, active week 1. He wasn't injured yet with the knee injury. That was only after week 1, and Ambry Thomas played over him because he had a kind of a weekend to the offseason, and I guess he didn't perform well in the practices leading up to the season. And then the other thing with Womack is, hey, like they don't look at him as a nickel at all. They look at him as an outside corner, and they looked at Ambry Thomas ahead of him at the start of the season. So whether I like him or not, whether they invested a pick in him or not, whether that he was a starter going into the season last year, it feels like he's got his work cut out a little for him with the 49ers because he seems on the outside looking in each one of these personnel decisions that they seem to make in regard to their corners.
Yeah, and that's why I wouldn't be surprised if they go back in the 24 draft with the amount of picks they have and select yet another corner. I would not be
Multiple,
surprised.
probably.
Yeah, you might
One
need a
earlier and one
few.
a
You
little bit
might need a
later.
few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They need the depth
But
as
hey,
well.
Vish,
That's the issue.
yeah, I mean, you're right in that you kind of do need depth, especially after this year. I was going to point that out right now in terms of last offseason. We talked, or like this offseason, we talked about depth going into the offseason. They didn't do much. They signed Oliver, obviously. He's a Wilkes guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then they drafted one corner. So you didn't really add much depth. I wonder what they try and change this year.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair to them, they've always been kind of happier with their corner depth than the rest of us. And they've been right
Yeah.
longer than us. Now, they've also had stretches of football where they've played with Josh Norman. So we got to give them the I told you so. But for the most part, they've figured it out and had competency playing at the corner position. Or even they've gotten moderate production from guys who haven't been so good. Like the year they had to play with rookie Ambry Thomas. They found a way
Yeah.
schematically, and then through the use of their other 10 players to cover for that. So yeah, no offense, Ambry. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm always, if there's one Niners player that just catches strays from me, it's that guy.
That's unfortunate. Ambry Thomas, we apologize. But Vish,
Let
we
me
talked
ask you
about a
this
lot
though
today.
before we
Go
go,
ahead.
because I know you're gonna end it, but before we go, Did you
Let's do
think
it.
the Chase Young move was the best move of free agency, or the trade deadline? Excuse me, the trade deadline almost felt like free agency with the number of players that moved. Did you think it was Chase Young, or did you think it was the Eagles getting Byard?
What did you say about the other move?
Or I said versus the Eagles getting Byard. I guess you can pick like
Oh,
Sweat moving to the Bears or Mecole Hardman going to the Chiefs if you want. I figured that those were the two mainstream moves made by the arguably the two of the two or three or four best teams in the NFL. If you still want to put the Niners there, I'm not sure that they're there right
mm,
now. But we're talking about those two moves made by them, high profile moves, high profile teams. I guess so.
yeah.
Those were the two I compared. But what was the best trade deadline move in your opinion?
If I'm considering the moves made on trade deadline day, I would probably put the Chase Young trade at number one. However, I do think that if you're talking about the Byard trade as well, I'm going to give the Eagles the slight edge. I think Byard fits a bigger need for the Eagles. I think they specifically highlighted the one position they needed help at, which was safety, and they now get Kevin Byard, who, albeit is a little step down from his elite production in general. He's a little older, so this move isn't really one for the future as much as it is for just this year. But they didn't pay that much given, and they're also not paying him that much this year in general. The Titans are taking on a lot of that salary. It's a 1-year deal for Kevin Byard. I'll give them the edge just because I think it fit a bigger need than the 49ers getting another defensive end. But of the trades made on trade deadline day, I do think that Chase Young was the most valuable, or it was the best move overall. I'd give it the highest grade. I think I'd give it a higher grade than the Montez Sweat trade. I think I'd give it higher grade than the Ezra Cleveland grade, which I thought was a pretty good one. I
That was a
thought,
good move.
I mean, that was a surprise that he was
Yeah.
only gone for a sixth. He was going to get traded, but for a sixth was pretty solid. I thought that was
He had good
a good move.
metrics this year.
Yeah, yeah. It's just they have Dalton Reisner, and so they're fine moving on because I mean,
Right.
if you have an additional offensive lineman, usually you should get value for them, but I guess not in this case. A 6th-round pick, no.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Okay.
what do you think?
I love I love the way you describe that because I do think Byard is a great move for Philadelphia and he fits them like a glove. Okay. And I agree with you. He's a step down, but he's still probably an excellent player. Maybe he's even a better player than Chase Young at this juncture, though I'm not 100% sure of that. But in terms of pure value, Rohan, in terms of, hey, when we compare the value of getting Byard or getting Chase Young for a compensatory pick, and we're talking about edge rusher versus the safety, that's where I really give the Niners the edge. I do think that Byard also filling a need helps Philadelphia. But again, when you're talking about getting the value of a 24-year-old edge rusher for a compensatory pick, and maybe I just have it all wrong with Chase Young, okay? Maybe I haven't been paying attention to what's going on the last couple of years. Like maybe Chase Young is not who I think he is. But I've seen a lot of the highlights and stuff of his rushes. I've seen people break down some of his rushes on Twitter and stuff like that. And he looks like Chase Young to me in a lot of ways, or at least the Chase Young I remember. I will go and watch him. I'm going to do it tonight after this show. Tomorrow, maybe not tomorrow. Tomorrow before my show with Larry and Jesse, for sure. I'll have watched him to maybe have a little better opinion. If you consider my opinion, Matt, for watching him any better, I don't know if it's really that much better, but I guess it's better. But I'll definitely watch him, but I don't understand it at all, Rohan. I don't understand why that's the competitive value for a 24-year-old edge player with that level of talent. How can you
I
not
don't.
take that risk? Even
Yeah,
even if it includes having to pay him. Even if it includes having to pay him.
yeah. I think you make a good point. I think the value part is especially intriguing because a compensatory pick, for those of you that don't know, Chase Young is going to be a free agent this year. Washington likely wouldn't have gotten him. They would have got a 3rd-round compensatory pick in 2025. They are trading it for the equivalent of a 2024 pick and losing a half season of production from Chase Young. The 49ers are going to get a compensatory pick in 2025 because I don't expect them to re-sign Chase Young. They're going to get another 3rd-round pick, essentially
Right.
eliminating the one that they lose. They get a half season of production, and they already have 2 3rd-round picks in 2024 to the point
Yep.
where you don't necessarily need an extra 3rd-round pick in 2024. You can, in a way, you might want to kind of move one from 24 to 25 to continue to balance it out. And so the 49ers are getting additional value. They're not losing too much because they already have good capital in the 2024 draft, while also getting a whole half a season of Chase Young, who has looked good this year, especially as a pass rusher. I know the run metrics haven't been as high as you'd hope compared to his rookie year, but he's looked good as a pass rusher.
Yeah, and he has 5 sacks, which is,
Yeah.
5 sacks is 5 sacks. No matter how you want to say he's getting the sacks, that's 5 sacks. That's real production. That's more. I think that would be the most on the Niners right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is the most on the Niners right now. But I also agree with you on the Chase Young production and the run metrics. Wait, what did you say before that? I just blanked for a second.
The value of a compensatory pick, how
Oh, yeah. So the
it's
one thing I wanted to add to that compensatory formula is part of the reason why the Niners aren't pressed about their 2024 Ran Miko, as John Lynch called it, compensatory pick, is because they're going to probably likely get a 3rd round pick for one Mike McGlinchey, who signed a massive contract with Denver. And that's why they are comfortable with getting the compensatory pick for Chase Young only in 2025.
and the good part is they're getting a 3rd round compensatory pick for Mike McGlinchey, and that's not the one that they're losing when they, got Javon Hargrave. They got Javon Hargrave, but Jimmy Garoppolo obviously canceled that out.
Right.
And then
He
they get
cancels it
another
out.
3rd round compensatory pick for
Right.
McGlinchey, and then another one in the Ran Miko pick, which they just moved. So you're still ending up with 2 compensatory picks while also ending up with Chase Young and ending up with Javon Hargrave.
Not to mention the sweetness of Mike McGlinchey has been utterly awful in Denver.
Jesus Christ, that might be the
Yeah.
worst free agent signing of the offseason. It
He
probably
wasn't
is,
even
right?
this bad in San Francisco. He
Yeah,
wasn't.
no, this has been
He's
really
been
bad.
awful in Denver.
Yeah.
And then
The reason Colton
Jimmy
McKivitz probably doesn't
Garoppolo's
get as
been
much hate is because McGlinchey has been really bad there. Yeah.
And then Jimmy
Yeah.
Garoppolo's been pretty much terrible with the
Oh
Raiders.
my
Now
God.
it's
He's
been a
done.
lot of Jimmy
His
Garoppolo things.
career in Vegas is done because he's
And his
probably
career as a
that contract
starter is
was
done. His career
yeah.
as a starter is done because it's not just the fact that he's been utterly awful with the Raiders. He's getting hurt just about after every single one of these games. So I don't doubt that he's probably banged up even now. And maybe that plays a factor into his play being utterly awful, but it doesn't matter because availability is a skill. It's not
Right.
it's an ability. It's not something, it's part of what makes you good at your job. It counts in this equation. And he is never available. So yeah, it's kind of funny because the Niners are getting even a double 3rd round compensatory pick, one for Garoppolo that gets canceled by Hargrave. Though Hargrave has not been great the last couple of games, is nuts. And then the
one from McGlinchey.
The one for McGlinchey, man, that one's just hilarious at this point because
Yeah.
he's been like, I defended him for how he was in San Francisco when people got at him. But the way people criticized him in San Francisco is literally how he's playing in Denver. Like, it's that
Right.
bad.
Right. I mean, he's playing how fans thought he was playing in San Francisco. He's actually
Maybe
doing it
he
now.
was playing that bad. Maybe we were wrong for defending him. That's what I'm thinking after watching him in Denver.
Right. But I mean,
goes
I don't
to
know.
show how much the scheme helps more than just the quarterback, huh?
Yeah. Poor Mike. But that's unfortunate. Another bad contract out there, unfortunately, for Denver.
Oh, yeah. Along with Russell Wilson, huh?
Yeah.
And Sean
I had
Payton,
to throw that one in
perhaps.
there. Yeah, that one. I mean, that one you traded 1st and 2nd round pick out there.
And Walmart's
for
the
that.
one paying because he's getting paid what is it? It's reported to be like up north of $20 million for Sean Payton, right?
You're saying the contract, right? Yeah, it was pretty.
Yeah, even though
high.
we're never supposed to know what coaches make.
Yeah, no, it was about in the neighborhood of 18 million a year.
Jeez.
He
So
could
basically, Walmart
earned
is funding
100
Sean
million
Payton's
with
retirement
incentives.
and his
Yeah,
family wealth, generational wealth, his kids.
That's probably got to be the highest paid coaching contract, I would assume.
Nah,
I know Bill
dude, 'cause
recently
nobody
got
knows
one.
what Belichick is making.
Bill,
Belichick
he
has to
recently
be.
got an extension at the
Dude,
beginning of the
think about
season
it
that nobody
though.
talked about.
He's a GM and the coach.
Right.
And then Shanahan's had 2 extensions with the 49ers. I know the first extension, the speculation was it put him north of $10 million. Are you telling me that the second extension is keeping him in the same realm? He definitely got a raise with that extension.
And it's interesting because you never know, right, the amount of money that they're getting in these extensions. So the owner could keep it hush because it's just straight out of the owner pocket. It's not like you have a cap or anything for these.
And then with Kroenke's pockets, think about it. Jed kept John Lynch away from Amazon, and Kroenke has those massive pockets, and he had to keep Sean McVay away from the booth. What do you think McVay's got? And McVay's got a Super Bowl. Like, dude, these coaches are making.
McVay teases retirement every year, gets a low raise, continues forward.
Dude, who knows? Who knows? Because none of us ever know. None of us. That's actually one thing that pisses me off. Okay, not. We'll go on a little side rant, and then maybe we'll end the show because this people might not like this rant at all because they might think like, dude, who cares if you're pissed off about this? But it pisses me off that we have the right to talk about players and we put their contract on them and we stick it in front of their face. Like, you're not, I just did it. I just did it in this show to Javon Hargrave. Like, oh, big free agent signing. And he's not playing up to that. Why does the coaches' contracts have to be so secretive? Why do they get to escape that criticism? Why can't we know? Kyle Shanahan, you're making $20 million. This doesn't cut it. Why can't we know? Sean McVay, you're making $90 million. I'm throwing arbitrary numbers out, by the way. You're making $90 million. Like, why can't we know that and evaluate them based on that and criticize them based on that?
Because that is, that is an important thing. I know you don't have a salary.
It feels
cap,
ugly,
so
right? It feels ugly to throw that number out in front of a player. Like, we're not the ones choosing to pay him that. They didn't they didn't tell anybody that you have to. Well, they kind of did, but like they're also getting paid that. Like they earned that as well. And so then throwing that number around anytime they don't perform, I also think is a little unfair, even though I just did it. So like I'm a hypocrite there.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting because when I think about it from a college landscape, we know everything about what college coaches make. Every college head coach and things like that. And those contracts are big, right? Because they're all university sponsored and all that. So we know exactly what they make, but not for NFL head coaches.
Yeah, it's a weird phenomenon, but maybe if people like that, we should have more rants like that. I have quite a few things that get me somewhat
quite a few thoughts that way.
Reason. Yeah. Oh, that way is correct. So many things that just peeve me for no reason that probably nobody else in the world really cares about, but I do.
Hey, that's for that. Maybe there's just one show. Maybe you just do one show a week where you just, give off a little rants that way or another way about certain things that just
piss me off.
The football world. Yeah,
things that piss. Oh, dude, if I got started on the media parts of the football world, I mean, I've done a couple of rants on them. If I got started on like draft Twitter and pre-draft opinions,
you'd probably burn a good amount of bridges that way.
Oh, not even burning bridges. I think I would just be labeled the angry guy who's always complaining, which I guess I'm a little bit of a complainer. Who knows?
It's okay. It's no big deal. You are a complainer.
Yeah, exactly. What are you going to do, right?
People. Yeah. Oh, well. This is what we do. Too bad. This is what we do. People just got to deal with it.
I like it. Look at that. The guy's in college. He's hiding his Pepsi under the camera so that nobody can see him drinking it. But look at the wisdom that's exuding from the guy. I remember when I had the college wisdom. It all disappeared though.
My college desk right now is a mess and with a lot of weird things. So yeah.
But always weird things that you can stick under your laptop to stack it so that it's because elevation is supposed to be good in terms of height for the stream, right? That was an early tip I learned. So I would always have like 8 different notebooks, all with different scribbles of different notes or scratch paper that I use. And I would then close them and shove them under my laptop and bang, I would have an elevated thing for the original times I was streaming. Or I would have like, now I have like an official light and a mic. Look at this. Before it would just be whatever lamp was in my room would be on and it would be like hurting my eyes.
We still got the one thing that keeps us unique is the backgrounds. We still got the blank backgrounds.
True. I love that you go white and I go a little darker. That contrast is beautiful.
Yeah. We were going to keep it this way because I don't think I'm ever going to put something up on this wall.
Oh, I plan to eventually. If anybody knows the right person, I'm open to an interior decorator. I'd prefer to do it for free, but I'm not opposed to paying. Preference is free, though.
Yeah. But hey, Vish, this was a fun show. We talked about a lot. We talked about trade deadline. We talked about Chase Young, the way the 49ers need to make improvements. Talked about the cornerback position. Oh, I did disappear. Yeah. My computer may have shut off. and then I come back. So hopefully nobody heard what I said in between. But we had a fun show, and thank you for keeping it alive during those moments. And then we ended it off with a little bit of a personal insight. We'll call it that way. Any last thoughts though before we head on out of here?
No, I'm good. I guess Perna Moore is bringing up Steve Wilkes coming down. Do you want to just talk about that? I don't know
Let's
that
do
I
this.
really understand how that makes a difference. I've seen other coaches say that you can feel the energy of the game, your team, a little bit better to maybe make calls that are more suitable to them. I think it's based on preference, but I do think part of the change is that they're not 100% sure what needs to change, and they're just trying to change a little bit of things with vibe and energy to improve that part, because when the morale is better, obviously it does help defense in general. So I think that's
Yeah.
really all this is, but I don't know enough about how this makes a difference. So yeah.
I think this one's interesting because to me, I don't think that the 49ers would experiment this for the reason people are like saying because D'Amico, Robert Saleh, they were energizers. I don't think Steve Wilkes is like that really. I think honestly, if they do this move, it's to help Kyle Shanahan because Kyle Shanahan can directly talk with Steve Wilkes, communicate with Steve Wilkes in the game, and potentially be a little more involved on that side to where he helps Steve Wilkes out, but also has some head coaching input on the defensive side of the ball. I think that that's something that they might look to experiment with. And again, it's the experimentation plan because Shanahan obviously wants to solve this issue. But I don't know if bringing him down from the booth where he has said personally, publicly, he feels more comfortable. I don't know if that's the best solution, or at least it's going to be the solution for the reason fans think it'll be.
Well said. I agree.
Yeah, but appreciate the comment there and appreciate everybody who tuned in to this show. Thank you guys so much, especially, with a little bit of a later show today. But it was a fun show as always, Vish, and definitely had a lot to talk about. We'll be back soon for sure.
100%. This was an awesome show, and maybe we should make this a weekly Wednesday thing.
Yeah, and the time will slowly go back and back and back to the point where we're starting at 11 p.m. Pacific time. Yeah.
And I go into work every Thursday, so that isn't that great for my sleep.
Yeah.
Especially given that there's no chance I'm going to sleep right after this.
No, it'll probably take an hour or 2 hours, and then then you're sitting there at 1 o'clock or whatever it is, thinking, damn, should have got a couple hours of sleep.
When you say it out loud, it makes me feel a lot worse. So that's what's gonna happen.
Well, I think the same way too, because there's no chance I'm going to sleep right now either. And so that's gonna be a little unfortunate for the sleep tomorrow.
100%. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you. See you, Rohan.
All right. We'll see you next week.